वकील हूं तो कहीं ना कहीं मुझे ऑब्जेक्शन तो उठाना पड़ेगा. Most people believe that we perhaps live in the age of battle of ideas and that this is a narrative war, where even if there is no battlefield, a narrative is imperative because you have to communicate not just with the present but also with the future. So let me try and express it. वकील हूं तो कहीं ना कहीं मुझे ऑब्जेक्शन तो उठाना पड़ेगा. So I think last year there was a hearing that was going on in the Delhi High Court, and both parties before the judge were trying to present their competing narratives. And the judge remarked, and this was one of the widely reported remarks, that it's never the party which is on trial, it is the judge who is always on trial. Because it is for the judge to sift between truth, facts, and lies. I think that has more or less become the role of every person who consumes information today. I don't think there is any person today who is capable of saying that I am able to make up my mind without a competing narrative or a competing version being presented on the same subject, no matter what the subject is. Now, that takes us to a slightly different question. Is there any distinction between narrative and propaganda? Are they synonyms? Are they paryayvachi in any sense? To my mind, that may not be the case. Propaganda is manufacturing facts and manufacturing opinions without facts. Narrative is presenting your version based on facts reasonably, which is narrative still has some correlation, some nexus, some basis in tathya. Propaganda is always as far as away from facts and truth. Now, therefore, perhaps what is imperative is to understand the distinction between what is narrative and what is propaganda. But why is this even relevant to the current times that we live in? Most people believe that we perhaps live in the age of battle of ideas and that this is a narrative war. My reading as a fledgling lay student, an untrained student of history, political science and civilization, and law for that matter, is that a war of narratives has always been present. It's only a question of the centrality that has been given to it. So previously, if people disagreed, they were quick to draw their swords. And now the battlefield is the mind space of the consumer. Whoever occupies that particular mind space ultimately gets his way or gets his say. And that's precisely why this narrative war becomes so crucial. So from my own professional fraternity, let me try and give you an example which perhaps people can relate to, and so that I can simplify this for everybody's consumption. Just by a show of hands, how many people consume basmati here? Okay. How many people have possibly heard of the nexus between basmati and the state of Madhya Pradesh? How many people have heard of the nexus between basmati and Punjab and Haryana or northern parts of India? Okay. So at the very least, the perception is that basmati has more to do with the region above the Vindhyas than with the Vindhyas or Madhya Bharat. What if I were to tell you that there are records to establish that cultivation of basmati and consumption of basmati in Madhya Bharat, at the very least, dates back to Akbar's period, and there are records from Akbar's own kitchens and inventory to show that basmati was consumed and produced in that region. And that makes it an older consumer of basmati than perhaps even Haryana for that matter. Because this part of Bharat or this side of the border, basmati cultivation was predominantly, or rather it saw a spike because of migration of those farmers post 1947. And they had to come to this side of the border. So popular perception will tell you that basmati has nothing to do with the state of Madhya Pradesh, whereas reality or facts may tell you that it actually has some connection, and its case on basmati may be better than certain North Indian states. This is the distinction between narrative and propaganda. This is the distinction between popular perception and facts. I think it is both fortunate and unfortunate for us to be consumers of information in this age. Fortunate because there's an explosion of information. Fortunate because there was a time when news, information, shaping of influence was the fiefdom of the select few, the elite few. With time, with change in policies, politics, and with change in technology, which I think has been the biggest game changer, there has been greater democratization of opinion and greater democratization of creation of opinion and dissemination of facts. But that also means that the consumer is currently faced with a surplus and he doesn't know what to do with it. How do you exactly place reliance on any medium or any platform at this point? So what do we do as human beings? We operate in bubbles. We choose to put faith in those platforms which is close to our vichardhara. And that's how you create echo chambers. So the problem of today is not just the existence of multiplicity of opinions, but the irony is, with more information, we would have expected people to consume more information which is of opposing nature. But with time, we will restrict ourselves only to our own echo chambers because the human mind looks for comfort, and comfort is, I will choose the filter based on vichardhara as opposed to tathya or facts. That is the unfortunate reality. Nevertheless, I don't think Bharat or this Sanskriti has the option or luxury of running away from this battlefield. तो इसको देखने के दो नजरिए हो सकते हैं. First, अगर कोई रण ना होता, and if there was no battlefield and there was no summer, so to speak, तब क्या narrative की जरूरत पड़ती? Or has the imperative of a narrative become necessary because of an ongoing battle or war? Now, there are two possible ways of looking at it. I'm not presenting any conclusions. I'm only throwing a couple of thoughts for you to consume. One, even if there was no battlefield or even if there was no war of narratives, narrative is a perception of the self. And even if there was no other to deal with, you would need a narrative to understand your own self and also to pass it on to the next generation, because when you pass on history to the next generation, you're not giving them just a set of facts. You're also giving them a certain perception of yourself as to who we are and where we come from. So strictly speaking, in that sense, I don't approach the word narrative with a negative connotation. I certainly have a problem with propaganda, but not narrative. Now, that is the first situation where even if there is no battlefield, a narrative is imperative because you have to communicate not just with the present, but also with the future. But when there are people and there are agencies and there are forces and there are groups and there are vested interests which are interested in defining you for you and who do not wish to give you the basic fundamental right to define for yourself who you are and where you come from, the building of a narrative is no more an academic exercise. It is an existential, civilizational exercise. It is an imperative. There is no running away from it. Who are Hindus? What is the origin of the Hindavi civilization? Where do they come from? What are their geographical origins? Our complexions have become the subject of discussions. Our ethnicities have become subject of discussions. So I certainly agree with Mr. Punj on the point that the battle of narratives, perhaps in this subcontinent, owes its origins to the colonization project. Because until then, the invader who put stock in the sword was not interested in building a narrative. He was absolutely clear about what he was here for. But then comes, I think, at the fag end of the 17th century, the European colonizer, who realizes that this particular civilization cannot be won over by the strength of the sword or on the strength of the sword, and he realizes that I need to use the mind as the battlefield here. And therefore starts a battle of narratives, where the first ground of his experiment is your mind, is your dharana, is your Sanskriti, is your origin. And dare I say this, I don't think we have come out of it yet. The layers of imposed wisdom of who we are and where we come from is a constant battle in every sphere today, from academia to politics to media to even legal discussions. I'll give you a simple example. Try presenting any legal philosophy which has its origins in Bharatiya Sanskriti to any leading law school or a student of any leading national law school in this country. You will not succeed. Because a narrative has already been created about the regressive nature of Bharatiya Sanskriti and Hindu philosophy, to the extent that people are not even willing to consume that we have had something to contribute by way of jurisprudence, by way of philosophy, so on and so forth. So at the most fundamental level, at the most practical level, forget the political level, at the level of education, at the level of formulating of basic policies, even at the level of dressing and whatnot, narrative has played a huge role. So what do? Do we employ the strategy of our brothers and sisters from the left and resort to propaganda? I would say that is certainly not the Bharatiya way. In my limited experience of dealing with students across the board on campuses across the country, what I have benefited from is the traditional Sanatan way of presenting facts and leaving the conclusion of truth to the audience. Put faith in facts seems to be the mantra that has worked, even in the most hostile of spaces. And my limited suggestion here is, if this battle of narratives must be won, we must look at our history, at our present, and towards the future. With facts, truth, logic, and morality as our constant companions, that is the only way we succeed. I don't think it's possible to take an Orwellian approach to this battle, because that is a race to the bottom. We may succeed in the present, but the future will only inherit the air and the sand. Namaste. Thank you.